This past Friday, April 1st, something pretty big happened in the market that the mainstream media, for the most part, ignored. Now, CNBC did briefly touch on this issue, but I feel that they really should have paid more attention to this as it's a pretty big indicator in the market. Now, on Friday morning, around market open, there were two very big reports released, the non-farm payrolls report and the ISM manufacturing report. So there were other things going on during the day. But this third thing that I'm talking about, well, I'll just go ahead and say it. The Dow Transports being down by almost 5% in one day is something pretty serious that really deserved more attention. So here, let me show you my screen. The Dow Transports, you can see it right here, right? Dow Transports was down negative 4.74% on Friday, April 1st. And actually, this is the most in exactly 2 years. So here, I'll show you. Negative 4 point, so there were, in the past couple of years, there have been no 5% down days. But yeah, the last time it was down by this much, so it was actually down by more, ironically, on April 1st, 2020, so exactly 2 years ago. So yeah, this past Friday, it was down by 4.74%, and that's the most in exactly 2 years. And so in April 2020, in March 2020, you can see there were quite a few days where it was down almost 5%, or by much more than 5%. But the funny thing about these days, here, let me turn my camera back on. The funny thing about these days is that, or I guess you should say the funny thing about this past Friday, is that the Dow Transports was down by so much, right? The S&P was actually up. So the overall stock market was actually green this past Friday, but the Dow Transports was down almost 5%. So that's actually much more alarming than it even looks on the surface, because when you look back at April 1st, 2020 or March 2020, around the pandemic time, all these days that, here, I'm lagging, let me turn my camera off. So all of these days that the Dow Transports was down by so much, the market itself was down by almost as much during the same day. And this past Friday, right, the Dow Transports was down by almost 5%. The S&P not only wasn't down by nearly that much, but it was actually up on the day. So the Dow Transports was down by almost 5% on April 1st, this past Friday. The S&P was actually up on that day. And so, like I said, the mainstream media barely even talked about this kind of thing. Here, let me turn my camera back on and see if it's any better right now. So yeah, like I said, the mainstream media barely even talked about this thing, but CNBC did touch on it very briefly. And I actually went ahead and just wrote down the quote that actually, it was Jim Cramer who talked about this. And I actually wrote down what he said about this. And just a disclaimer before I read this, well, part of this information is correct, and part of it's just wrong. And so, yeah, that's what's funny. CNBC is one of, if not the major news outlet for business news, and only one person talked about it, and he doesn't even get it right. And, well, that's not my opinion. I can show you. I'll show you later on in this video. So I'll read you the quote, and then I'll go over it. So he said, in the last 4 weeks, so this is in regards, of course, to the Dow Transports being down by so much. He said, in the last 4 weeks, spot trucking rates have fallen as much as 35%. There was another big decline just this week. The drivers are back. There are too many drivers. There are more drivers than there were before the pandemic. No one's talking about this. The people involved in freight are stunned by the decline in trucking rates we've had just in the last 4 weeks. It's a supply issue. The truckers are back. Okay, well, part of that statement's correct, and part of it's incorrect. So here, I'll just go over it one by one. I actually want to talk about something I mentioned earlier when I said that there were 2 reports released earlier Friday morning, one of those being the non-farm payrolls report. So I want to go over that report really fast, or just a very small part of that report, because that relates to part of the quote that I just read off. So here, I'm going to show my computer screen again, and I'll have myself here in the corner. So if we go to the BLS website, economic releases, so the thing that we're looking at is whether or not the drivers are back, whether or not truck drivers are back, right, as the quote said. So we can go to the establishment data, and all right, so we have our total non-farm. So remember, this past Friday, it was announced that 431,000 non-farm jobs were added over the past month, or in March 2022. And we can break down the non-farm into private and government, and then within private, we have goods producing, private service producing, and then under private service producing, we have transportation and warehousing. And that is where we can find trucking jobs. And here, there's another breakdown that I'll pull up over here. So we can see that in the month of March, there were negative 0.5, and this number is in thousands. So basically, this means transportation and warehousing lost 500 jobs in March. But we can see a larger breakdown right here. And so here, this is the transportation and warehousing we were talking about that lost 500 jobs in March. But then there's more breakdown right here. So we can see rail transportation, right, lost 300 jobs. And then truck transportation lost almost 5,000 jobs in March alone, right? And the quote that I wrote off said, well, the truckers are back, right? The drivers are back. There are too many drivers. So, right, that doesn't really add up. But part of the quote is correct, where it said there are more drivers than there were before the pandemic. And here, I'll show you right here, truck transportation jobs, Fred. And we can actually see a chart of the trucker jobs going back. Hold on. And what we want is seasonally adjusted. So look right here. We'll do a 5-year chart, 5 years. So yeah, we can see that there are more truckers than there were before the pandemic. Well, but not by very many. But the most important thing is, the question is, why were the Dow Transports down by so much on Friday, April 1st? And, okay, well, we can say there are more truckers now than before the pandemic. But it was announced on Friday morning that truckers actually, so, I mean, that doesn't make sense, right? Because, I mean, if the reason that the Dow Transports are down is because trucking jobs are so plentiful, then why would the Dow Transports wait until a report, the first report since the pandemic, that showed that trucking jobs had decreased during the past month? Why would they wait until that report to sell off, right? So, if anything, it seems like the opposite of what this quote was saying, right? So Dow Transports sold off, but they didn't sell off until a report came out that showed that trucking jobs had actually decreased during the past month. So is that the reason the transport sold off? Because trucking jobs decreased by so much during the past month? Well, partially. And here, let me show a couple more charts before signing off here. I'm going to show an article from the website freightwaves.com that actually sheds a lot of light on this topic. Let me turn my camera back on here. All right, so this article, you can see the title is "Just 3 Years After 2019's Trucking Bloodbath, Another is on the Way." So a little bit of background, 2019 was a horrible year for trucking and transportation in general. That's one of the many reasons why a lot of people were so worried about the American economy and really, I guess, the world economy in the year 2019. But that's the topic for another video. So this guy right here, the author, he says, we think another sharp, painful downturn in the U.S. truckload market is imminent, and it could be as bad as 2019. Let's look at some of the evidence here. In this chart, it says outbound tender volume index. And the tender, basically we're talking about load offers from shippers to trucking companies. That's all that means, right? Load offers from shippers to trucking companies. And so this is the tender volume index right here. And the orange line is for 2021, and then the blue line right here is for 2022, this year. And it's pretty much what you would expect because, well, I mean, the same part of the year, they line up pretty well. But then starting here in March, or I would say early March, late February, they really diverge. And you can see that over the past month or so, the tender volume index for the year 2022, over the past 4 or 5 weeks, has gone south, has greatly diverged from the tender volume index in 2021. And what is causing soft truckload volumes? Well, more than likely, lower volumes are due to a major consumer slowdown. So not a lot to do with the fact that there are just more truckers working, right? I mean, that is true. There are, as you saw, right, there are more truckers now than there were before the pandemic, but that doesn't really have a lot to do with the, a lot of the trouble going on in the trucking industry right now. And then this is something else in the quote, right? The quote, let me pull the quote back up, right? Remember, it said that spot trucking rates have fallen by, in the last 4 weeks, spot trucking rates have fallen by as much as 35%. Well, you can say they've fallen not quite by 35%. This is an over 10% drop in the past 4 weeks. And just to clarify, when we say spot trucking rates have fallen by 35%, we're not talking about the rates that are paid from trucking companies to their employees. We're talking about the rate that is paid from shippers to trucking companies. So those rates are back down to December, November levels. So not a serious issue. I mean, they've fallen by quite a lot in the past 4 weeks, but well, as you can see, that's really mostly because they went up by so much to begin with. The more concerning chart is this one right here, right? How there's been a major drop off of tender volume. And again, tender volume, we're just talking about the offers, the load offers from shippers to truckers. There's been a major drop off in the past 4 or 5 weeks, or a pretty big drop off. And then this right here, this chart right here, I thought was pretty interesting. It obviously doesn't have anything to do with current pain in transports, but it is something important to note. So a rash of trucking bankruptcies are on the way, and it will be a bloodbath 2.0. And it's talking about 2.0, right? The first bloodbath being in 2019. And you can see that, well, this is the total count of new fleets authorized for hire. So the new trucking fleets. And, right, oops. So we reached a peak right here before 2016. And then, well, remember, well, this is, again, a topic for another video, but remember, there was a lot of economic pain in the year of 2015, leading up to 2016. And then we had another trucking peak around, well, in 2019. So, right, these peaks correspond with, ironically, these peaks in trucking and new fleets correspond to weakness in the American economy. And this chart gets even more interesting when you think about what I mentioned earlier about the fact that there was a decrease in trucking employees during the month of March, which means that this chart right here is really inflecting downwards right now. So back to the quote from CNBC that said that spot trucking rates have been going down over the past month because of an increase in trucking employees. Well, that's not true. There's been a decrease in trucking employees over the past month, or in the month of March. And really, this chart right here doesn't even refer to the amount of money that truckers are paying their employees. It refers to the amount of money that shippers are paying to the truckers, right? And that has been because of, the decrease in this chart has been because of the slowdown in the trucking industry over the past 4 or 5 weeks. And that slowdown has in turn also caused this decrease in trucking employees. And here, there's one more article from freightwaves.com, from this website, freightwaves.com, that I thought was very important to go over. So, here, okay, right here. So, and you can see this is from Thursday, March 31st. So just literally one day before the Dow Transports decreased by almost 5%. Right, and actually another important thing to note, the Dow Transports was down by almost 5%, right? And right, yeah, I apologize for not mentioning this earlier. This is actually something pretty big, but right, the Dow Transports made up of really truckers, freight, ocean freight, rail freight, and airlines, right? And the thing is that normally, over the past couple of years, when we've seen Dow Transports be down by a very large amount, a lot of that has been because of airlines. Because, unless you've had your head in the sand, you are very well aware that the past 2 years has not been very friendly to airlines, especially the pandemic months. But the funny thing is, so I said that the weird thing about the transports being down by so much this past Friday is that, well, for one, the stock market as a whole was up, but then also airlines were actually up, right? So that's the other weird thing, because we have Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines, all of the airlines were actually up on Friday, April 1st. And, well, the airline index, XAL, was green on April 1st. So the stock market as a whole was up, the airlines were up, and, well, here, I'll talk about the chart. So, well, what I'm saying, the stock market was up, the airlines were up, but the transports were down. So basically we're talking about rails and trucking, right? So, yeah, that's just some more evidence that, right, there's a lot of pain there in the trucking sector. Right, JB Hunt sold off by almost 10%. So, yeah, that's just, I wanted to specify or clarify that before I continued on here. But this article, written one day before Friday, April 1st, that big Dow Transport sell-off. Why I believe a freight recession is imminent. All right, well, that's the same guy, the same author. This is his opinion, right? But he gives some other very good evidence to back that up. Previously, we talked about the total count of new authorized fleets, and then more importantly, the van rate per mile, and even more importantly, the outbound tender volume index. Now I want to talk about something called the outbound tender reject index. And this is basically, well, when there's an offer from a shipper to a trucker, well, some people say that the tender reject index is even more important than the overall volume index, because this just shows, well, it's what you would expect, just offers that have been rejected by truckers. So basically, right, the more offers you have from a shipper to a trucker, right, the more truckers can reject an offer. So basically, if you have a lot of rejects, that means there's a lot of demand, and not a lot of rejects, not a lot of demand. So, and it actually says that here, right? So basically what I'm saying, a high rejection rate means that trucking companies have more options to choose from. A low rejection rate means carriers have fewer options and freight to pick from. Since this measures actual load activity and not load board posts or searches, it tells us what the market is actually doing, right? And so yeah, before I talk about the start, here are some very interesting quotes right here that I just cut and pasted into this picture because I thought they were very noteworthy. So these quotes are all from people who work in the trucking industry. I've been following your increasingly apocalyptic takes on the freight market on Twitter and agree I don't think most are ready for the pain that could be coming. We were turning down 4 loads for every truck a year ago. Today, we are barely keeping our trucks running. In some markets, things are so bad that we've resorted to signing up for a load board account to keep them moving. The only market this reminded me of is right after September 11th. Consumer spending completely dried up, but the industrial economy had just come out of a recession, but it was rough for a few quarters. Right. So yeah, and well, I think most the scariest quote right here. I don't think most are ready for the pain that could be coming. All right. So anyway, this chart right here, the outbound tender reject index, right? And I talked about that earlier. I defined that earlier. So we can see this right here, and for those of you who are intimately familiar with the market, this chart may actually look somewhat familiar to you. This right here is January 2018. So you can see that this outbound tender reject index was green in 2018 before going negative in 2019. And then it had a brief recovery. And then it went very negative during the pandemic before having a strong recovery, slowly decreasing in 2021 and then cratering at the beginning of 2022, well, especially during the past month. So what chart does this, what chart is this similar to? And no, the answer is not the S&P 500. What chart is this similar to? So again, like I said, if you have an intimate relationship with the market and economics, this may look familiar to you. And it's actually funny because at the beginning of this video, I said that there were 2 reports released on Friday morning. One of them was the non-farm payrolls report, and we talked about that. And the other one, the ISM Purchasing Managers Index. And here, I'll put these 2 charts side by side so you can see there is a relation between these 2 charts, right? I mean, well, right here for the PMI, but we don't have a positive negative line. Well, really 50, right? Anything above 50 you can say is positive for the PMI, and anything below 50 is negative. So you can see in 2018, right, we had a great year before dipping down here in 2019. And then, well, the PMI, we had a bigger dip during the pandemic than we did for this freight index, for the outbound tender reject index. But, right, we can see we even have this brief recovery at the beginning of 2020 over here. So yeah, and then, right, 2021, we had a very strong recovery before pretty much cratering here at the beginning of 2022. So yeah, these 2 charts are not surprisingly very, very similar. And there's actually a chart that's even more similar to the outbound tender reject index. But to understand that, you have to think about the subcomponents of the ISM PMI. So right here, right, so here we have our overall manufacturing PMI, and we can see that there was a decrease that was announced on Friday, April 1st. This is for the month of March. There was a decrease for the month of March. But you've got to keep in mind, so right here we have the 11 subcomponents of the manufacturing PMI. So these aren't just different metrics altogether. The manufacturing PMI is made up of these 11 subcomponents. And we can see that one of the subcomponents, prices, actually had a drastic increase in the month of March. Surprise, surprise. So prices had a drastic increase in the month of March, but even with that drastic increase, the overall manufacturing PMI index decreased for the month of March. So what would the PMI look like without that major increase? Well, we can't see what the overall PMI would look like just without prices, but we can look at charts for each individual subcomponent. And well, we've been looking and talking about trucking, right? We've been looking at trucking charts, this outbound tender reject index. So which one do you think would probably have the highest correlation with this chart? Well, let's look at the chart for new orders. And I actually have that right here. So this is the new orders chart, right? So before we were looking at the overall manufacturing PMI chart, and this is the chart just for new orders, which is one of the subcomponents of PMI. And you can actually see that. So even the manufacturing PMI itself had a pretty strong correlation with this outbound tender reject index. But this right here, when we look at just the new orders subcomponent of the manufacturing PMI, we can actually see an even stronger correlation with this outbound tender reject index. So yeah, this big increase or this big decrease right here, then a small recovery, the decrease during the pandemic. So, I mean, this is pretty much the same as what we saw earlier, right? But the big difference is over here, right? Because really what we're talking about is, well, this is without prices, right? Prices being one of the subcomponents of the manufacturing PMI. And this is, right, this charts the new orders basically. So it would more resemble the manufacturing PMI without the price increases, without the price subcomponent. So yeah, we can see, right, well, it's more negative, right? Not surprisingly, because it doesn't have the added weight of prices. So yeah, so we can see right here, there's this decrease, and then there's this big crater in the month of March. So yeah, I mean, I know the last couple of minutes here has been kind of long-winded, but I just wanted to point out that we don't even have to look at something so arcane and esoteric like this chart right here, right? You don't really have to go and do all of this intense research because, right? I mean, this chart right here, this arcane esoteric chart, is just reflective of this. The ISM Manufacturing New Orders Index, the chart of the Manufacturing New Orders Index. So that's pretty much what it was. That's why. That's the answer. And here, I'm finishing up here, so I'm going to put myself back on screen. All right, there we go. So that's the answer to our original question. Why were the Dow Transports down so much on Friday, April 1st? Especially given that the market itself wasn't down and airlines being a subcomponent of the transport, they were down. So why were the transports down so much? Why was trucking and rail down so much? Well, here we have it. Well, I mean, our ISM manufacturing was down, but the reason it wasn't down more was just because of prices. We can see the ISM manufacturing new orders was down by quite a bit, right? By 7.9 percentage points for the month of March. And that was released on Friday morning, triggering the sell-off, the massive sell-off in transports. And again, I mean, the main reason that I showed you this chart right here was just to show you that if you were very savvy with the market, that you would have kind of had a heads up beforehand, before this data was released, which not very many people were aware of at that time. So you can see, this was kind of a harbinger for the ISM manufacturing report, the ISM manufacturing new orders report. Let me move myself out of the way again so you can see. So right, that, and then right, remember we talked about this chart right here, the outbound tender volume index. So right, all of this data right here, right, all of this data points to the fact that there has been major weakness for the trucking industry in the month of March. And the ISM manufacturing new orders report really pointed that out to the market. So even though there's been this pain, I feel that a lot of people, a lot of market participants weren't really aware of this. But then this all came to light. Even though there's been a month or more of pain, it all came to light on one day. And that's why there was such a massive sell-off on that one day. So again, just to go back to the quote from CNBC, the quote from CNBC says that spot trucking rates has fallen by as much as 35% in the past month, and right, well, not quite, maybe a bit more than 10%, but that's kind of on point. But then it says that this quote says there was another big decline just this week. The drivers are back. There are too many drivers. There are more drivers than there were before the pandemic. So, right, I mean, that's true. There are more drivers than there were before the pandemic, and the number of drivers has been going up, but that's been true for months and months and months and months. And actually, ironically, on April 1st, it was announced through the non-farm payrolls report that the number of truckers has declined over the past month. So, I mean, the reason that CNBC is giving for the sell-off is that there are more truckers now, but if anything, well, it's kind of the opposite. I mean, there are more than there were before the pandemic, but I mean, people have known that for months and months and months, but over the past month, right, they've actually been decreasing, and that's what people found out on Friday, April 1st. So to sum up, like I said, the fact that the Dow Transports were down by so much this past Friday was largely ignored by the mainstream media, and when it was brought up, the reasons given were mainly incorrect. And just to reiterate, the real reasons that the spot trucking rates were down by so much over the past month isn't because there were more individual truckers over the past month. That's not true at all. It's because of the major decrease in trucking volume over the past month, and that has been, and this is very important, because of the consumer slowdown in the month of March. Right, and that's the thing, that's the main takeaway from all this. So yeah, I thought that was pretty important, and that's why I wanted to shed light on that topic. Anyway, that's all the information I have for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.